We will go ahead and get started. We have some folks still rolling in, so as people come in, we can just welcome them and add them to the group. But hi, everyone. My name is Anna Guida. I work at Fourth on the Charge at Home project. Today, we are hosting one of our Charge at Home Roundtable sessions, and we are just so grateful that you're all here with us today. We have a wonderful presentation from Cinzia Pinamonti with Orange Charger today, and if you would like to see this recording of this webinar at a future time, you can find it on our Charge at Home website, which is chargeathome.org/events. The way we're going to do this today is we will have the education session followed by a pre-submitted Q&A session for those of you who dropped questions during registration. And then we'll end with a live Q&A where you can ask any questions, pose any ideas, and we'll kind of just discuss those as a group. If you can drop your questions into the chat box, we'll get to them at the end of the session. So yeah, that's what we got for you. A little bit about Charge at Home. So Charge at Home is a program of Fourth that provides electric vehicle charging guidance and resources to the multifamily industry and decision makers. So some of the resources we provide are market segmented EV installation toolkits. We have them for affordable housing, market rate housing, and we're about to roll out our condominium and student housing toolkits as well for both new and existing properties. We have an EV charging project builder tool as well, where we use state data and national data to generate unique kind of cost outputs and ROI calculations for decision makers. We also have one-pagers. We're building a suite of case studies, and we have some archived case studies. We're accepting case study submissions to co-create with companies, EV charging companies, developers, other multifamily folks. We've actually developed some with Orange Charger that we're doing right now. We also have a comprehensive glossary, communication templates for property managers and building owners to be able to communicate with residents about EV charging policies, resident empowerment resources, and education sessions like this one today. So moving into our presentation, Cinzia Pinamonti is the Vice President of Sales at Orange Charger, a leader in sustainable electric vehicle charging solutions for multifamily and commercial properties. With over a decade of experience driving revenue and scaling high-growth prop tech startups, Cinzia is passionate about helping companies embrace the future of clean energy. Under her leadership, Orange Charger has developed cost-effective, reliable, and scalable EV charging infrastructure, reshaping how property owners manage energy consumption. She has a proven track record of building high-performing teams and strategic partnerships. Cinzia's focus on long-term growth has made her a key figure in the EV charging industry. And for these reasons, we're so grateful you're here today, Cinzia. So I will pass it off to you, and you can just let me know when you're ready to advance the slide, and I'd love for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. And thanks, Fourth Team. We appreciate the relationship that we have with you guys. And for everyone on this call, please leverage their resources as much as possible. I would not be surprised if most of what I cover here can be found in the materials that they do share. But since we all are here, let's dive into what we'll be covering. So this presentation was designed to de-risk your planning and speed up confident decisions in EV charging. From a real-world walkthrough that we'll do for EV planning to some critical questions to ask yourself and your partners early on, some common missteps that you can avoid, and some data to back up the decisions that'll be made, and hopefully some takeaways that you can act on today. So excited to go through all of this. Before we get too deep in, I want to make sure that there's a couple of things that folks should know about EV drivers that matter when planning a system. And we're still early on in the system implementation. So there's a lot of folks procuring these systems that don't drive EVs themselves, and so may not know some of these details. But the average American commute is about 40 miles a day. And refueling an EV is very different than refueling a gas car. With our gas cars, they get taken down to empty, that light turns on, and you completely refuel. But an electric vehicle is different. You aren't doing a complete fuel up. With an EV, you're looking to just top off the energy that you used that day or the day before. and it's usually not that much energy. It's about 12 kilowatt hours to top off the average commute. So just knowing some of these details when planning systems is pretty helpful. You can jump to the next slide. So what I'll talk about right now are the impacts from a development perspective and a building perspective. But throughout this process, we'll definitely touch on several operational impacts as well. But for the sake of this example, we'll go through a call with a developer, right? We'll say that an EV charging code has been flagged for this development. And just for everybody to know, 14 out of the 50 states today have some level of building code requirement, meaning some percentage of parking has to have a charger on it. And whether that's 10% in some states to 50% in California, whether you have a building code or not, you'll be competing with properties that are bringing assets with charging at scale on them. So, but let's say for this example, code or demand initiates the need for charging. What you'll want to do is get all of the details of the code from your architect. And from there, understand what are the specific requirements within that code. Some codes call for certain levels of power, maybe different levels of power, 40 amp products to 20 amp products. They'll call for EV capable requirements or EV ready requirements. So it's important to understand how the code calls for specific charger types or specific power types. So once you have those details, you'll send your plans over to your charging provider for a review. If there's a code requirement, or even if there isn't, you should ask your architect to include those details in the parking summary section of your architectural plans. It will make everyone's life easier during review, planning, and procurement to have any EV charging requirements added to that parking summary in the first pages of your plan set. But when you are ready to send your plans over to your charging provider, give them as much parking considerations as possible for your property. So wherever you're thinking you're going to have shared parking or dedicated parking areas, it's important to know if the stalls are all on the community meter or if there are going to be any stalls on the residence utility meter, because if the stalls are on the residence meter, you actually don't have to procure any sort of elaborate charging system because the resident is going to pay for their own consumption. The systems that we're talking about today are systems that would go on community meters where the property needs to be reimbursed for the energy being consumed from the property. So your charging provider should be able to tell you by looking through your architectural and electrical plans what products they recommend to meet the code or meet the preferences for that property. And this is an opportunity for you and your charging partner to go through any value engineering exercises, right? A lot of these codes are new, or adding EV charging to properties is new, and there's ways to optimize systems when you understand different levels of power and how they relate to accessibility on the property. And I'm talking about accessibility in a shared environment or in a dedicated charging environment. But some other value engineering exercises that your partner can help you work through for when you're procuring charging would be to consider maybe how the product is mounted. So looking at your plans with you and trying to figure out where are the opportunities to wall mount chargers as much as possible versus pedestal mounting. That will help bring costs down. Your charging partner can help you make recommendations on charger locations. So recommendations on where to place shared chargers versus where to place dedicated chargers, and the power considerations that come with that as well, right? Wherever you have a location where you have shared charging, you probably want higher power products there so that cars can rotate through quicker, versus wherever you have dedicated charging, you can consider bringing the power down and value engineer some of that infrastructure because folks will be parked in those dedicated areas overnight or for longer dwell times. Some providers will come back, or once you're all aligned on the charger recommendations, be aware of any additional infrastructure requirements that are needed to get those chargers online. Um, things can come up like data cabling, Wi-Fi needs, cell booster needs. So the more infrastructure that you're needing to procure for the chargers that you're sourcing, should make you realize that perhaps those systems weren't quite meant for the multifamily setting. So just be cautious of those. But once you're aligned on charger recommendations and any additional infrastructure, this is when you'll start to dig into any reoccurring software costs to operate the chargers. So every company does it a little differently, but ultimately you're going to want to find out what your operating teams are going to have to pay for and for how long. So be cautious of any long-term commitments and for paying for devices that don't get used, because a lot of these codes are calling for charging at scale. But you may not have that scale of drivers on day one, so be aware of any reoccurring software fees that get applied to all chargers versus the chargers that are getting used. And then lastly, once you've determined what the ongoing costs are going to be, this is where your team can start to consider if there are any ancillary revenue opportunities. But you'll need to know all of those factors before you can pencil any ancillary revenue opportunities. And then the stage of your project defines what's going to still be possible from an EV charging perspective. So if you're in the early planning stages, this is obviously where you have maximum flexibility for integration. Here you can plan for the right wire size and power and locations of chargers. And use case is going to drive what power levels you're going to install. As we'll talk about several times throughout this presentation, but wherever you have kind of longer dwell parking is where you can put lower power charging, and wherever you have shorter dwell parking or shared access to parking is where you'll put higher power chargers. If your designs are solidifying, there's still opportunities to implement cost-effective changes. But once you've locked in your loan, your construction loan, is when you're going to want to lock in the rates with your charging provider. So you'll want to get the best rates as soon as your financing is secured. Once you've broken ground, you definitely, depending on where you're at in the process, want to just focus on code compliance and minimal disruption. EV chargers are usually installed about 2 to 3 months before TCO, and then shipped a few months before that. So you'll just want to plan for lead times in that sense. But yeah, you can still send, no matter where you're at under construction, you can still send your plans to your provider to see what value engineering exercises you can do to remove some common infrastructure mistakes that we see. And then lastly, I mean, if you've got a completed project, then you're talking a retrofit at this point. So you'll just want to focus on adapting current infrastructure with minimal disruption and maximizing your available electrical capacity. So if you're going to come in and bring charging in now, just future-proof now. It costs so much to come to the property and continue to add chargers. So whatever load you have at that point, try to install as many chargers as you can without triggering unnecessary upgrades, electrical upgrades. Obviously, code language matters. Oftentimes, teams can waste time and budget when they don't understand these terms. So you'll want to look for the voltage and amperage requirements when you see these terms. And look for charging partners or organizations that can cover the full scope. so you don't end up with bifurcated charging systems on your property. So there are solutions out there that solve part of this scope. There are some that solve all of the scope, so you'll want to keep it as simple for your residents as possible. But just know that this can vary from code to code, but these are generally the most common terms, with EV capable being, you've planned for the panel capacity of future charging. EV ready, meaning you've got the wires pulled, and you've got a receptacle or outlet in place. And a fully installed EV charger is usually an EVSE requirement that is got that nozzle style product installed. So we wanted to call out sort of the top 5 common mistakes in multifamily EV charging installations. I've touched on a couple of them, but just to really call them out, one of the biggest mistakes we see is over electrifying all of the stalls. And more power leads to inflated capex and just unscalable systems. So I'm not sure if folks can see the wires or even my face. I'm not sure if my screen is sharing, but I've got kind of 2 wire sizes here. One is a lot thicker than the other. And the smaller one here is meant for dedicated chargers. So both of these would support level 2 devices. The smaller one being for a dedicated charger. So the smaller wire size, the more savings that you'll have on infrastructure. But it also means the smaller wire size, the less power that you have. So you would pull less power to stalls where the dwell time is longer. Areas where residents are typically parked overnight is where you can see that infrastructure savings, and you don't need to electrify the stall as much. Whereas this larger wire, which folks are most used to installing, this is for your typical 40 amp charger. And it makes sense, right? More wire is going to mean more energy. And so you'll want this in areas of short dwell times where a quick fuel up is needed. Another mistake is underestimating networking and connectivity requirements. Many chargers require complex networking infrastructure that's costly to install and maintain, and it's often unreliable in our parking structures. So just be very aware of the requirements and costs that are going into getting some of these types of devices online. Also, overlooking ongoing operating costs. Expenses like software subscriptions, commissioning fees can erode long-term ROI. So definitely look out for the ones that will bill you regardless of utilization, because this inhibits future proofing. You're going to want to, by meeting codes or installing chargers, oftentimes you'll want to future proof, but those reoccurring software subscriptions will inhibit the ability to do that. Also, we talked about this a little bit in the first mistake, but not right sizing power from the beginning or using some kind of load management system. So oversized chargers add panel inefficiencies and costs. So despite drivers only needing a modest amount of daily charging, we still see folks installing oversized charger. So right sizing is what we discussed a bit ago, is making sure you're pulling the right sized power circuit for the behavior and dwell time of that spot. Power management is also an option, but it's important to weigh those costs. And then lastly, defaulting to shared chargers instead of dedicated access. Shared chargers are definitely better than no chargers, but in the long run, they're going to lead to scheduling conflicts and low satisfaction the moment that there's more drivers than shared chargers on your property. So dedicated access enables consistent usage and maximizes utilization of the chargers on your property. But honestly, I believe that the optimum solution is a blend, a hybrid of dedicated lower power chargers and shared higher power chargers in different locations on the property. But I have some utilization data that shows the differences across these different types of offerings here. So because Orange offers both dedicated lower power chargers and shared chargers, typically higher power, we can see the utilization of each product type and offering. And I believe for this report, we reviewed about 120 properties, and then we found that despite being lower power, the dedicated chargers get twice as much use and deliver about 1.6 times the amount of power as a shared EVSE. So it becomes like providing the right charger. The design becomes about resident behavior. If a resident knows that they're going to have access to a charger at home, they will do the majority of their charging at home. But the moment that they need to compete for chargers is when you start to lose some of that utilization to public stations or work chargers. And in order to receive any kind of payback for these installs, you want to keep as much of that charging consumption on site. Therefore, it's about accessibility, not necessarily power level. That's going to determine utilization, and ultimately, utilization is what's going to drive your payback and ROI on these chargers. And then another interesting behavior difference that we saw across charger types and accessibility types, again, being dedicated versus shared on the EVSEs, is when the power is being pulled, which you can see through these heat maps. The deeper the color, the more power that's being pulled. So in a shared setting to the right, the majority of the charging is happening during peak hours, which makes sense, right? Drivers are rushing home to be one of the first ones on the charger. And then you have folks rotating through that device, sharing it while they're awake. But then after bedtime, utilization starts to drop, and you've lost this off-peak window of utilization potential. Whereas with the two columns to the left, the dedicated lower power chargers, we're seeing sessions starting later. And because of the lower power draw, the devices are pulling all night long during off-peak hours. So this is definitely something to keep in mind if you're putting buildings up in areas where there are high demand charges from the utilities, and just in general as the grid becomes increasingly unstable. So I will leave you with this. Although this may not be everyone's goal, and I'm aware of that, there are ways to hack your payback period for these installations. And kind of the way to do that is to bring down the cost of CapEx wherever you can. Look for ways to eliminate OpEx, and then find ways to drive up the utilization, which will go hand in hand with resident satisfaction. So ways to reduce CapEx that we've talked about throughout this presentation is ensuring that you're right sizing, so picking the correct power and wire size for the type of charger that you want to offer, whether dedicated or shared. You're keeping an eye out for networking infrastructure costs. And depending on the charger type that you're installing, goes with labor costs as well. When considering OpEx elimination, you're looking for platforms that offer zero or reduced reoccurring software fees. Keep an eye out for long-term commitments and maintenance contracts that can get costly for your operating teams. And then to increase utilization, design an accessible system that aligns with the parking behavior, meaning the dwell time of the spots that you're trying to solve for. And that should increase resident satisfaction. So bring down the CapEx, eliminate the OpEx, increase the utilization, and you'll pay off the system a lot faster. Well, I hope this was helpful. I'm sure these slides will be sent out, but please connect with me our orange charger, because our platform was created specifically with multifamily in mind. So we're happy to answer any additional questions that this may have sparked. I think there were a couple of questions submitted in advance, so I'll pass it back to Anna so that we can start to tackle some of those.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chinzy. That was awesome. I really liked the visual that you gave with the chords. And maybe during the
See
Q&A,
them?
I could kind of see them, but maybe during the Q&A, we can stop sharing just because like sometimes
Yeah.
it's a great way to learn and share. So I just really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yes, so we're gonna move into the pre-submitted Q&A section right now. Please, if you have questions, it's a great time to ask. So you can start getting those percolating, drop them in the chat, or during the Q&A session, you can come off mute and we can have a conversation. But my colleague Whit Jameson might hop in as well. He'll definitely be helping with some of the pre-submitted Q&A. But yeah, it's a open kind of discussion Q&A session after we do the pre-submitted. So we invite you to join us. Okay, for the pre-submitted Q&A, we got two. This one was not messaged necessarily as a question, but more level 1 versus fewer level 2, site considerations, electrical capacity required, resident and building owner preference. So Chinzia definitely overviewed this for sure, but yeah, you and Whit can kind of jump in and address that.
I'll jump in first. Just want to say hi. My name is Whit Jameson. I've been with Fourth for a long time, and I've been a partner on the Treasure Home project since its inception. Love this discussion, and really loved seeing that graphic of the different percentage of time the different chargers are utilized. So particularly want to jump back to that at some point. Chinzi, are you okay with me taking a first stab at this question?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've written down sort of initial thoughts. I tend to find dedicated approaches for multifamily just are a higher value to the resident, potentially also a higher value to the property owner and manager, depending on the power levels, the other factors, and of course the cost it took to install those chargers. But there are typically limits where I say maybe a communal approach is better, or oh, you are not going to be able to upgrade your panel, therefore you're not going to be able to make enough dedicated parking spaces while still maintaining a decent charging experience. And I guess something that Chinzia mentioned earlier about load management. It's a hot topic in the multifamily EV charging sphere, but I think it's one that's still somehow the EV charging world knows a lot about it, but the multifamily world is still catching up to it. And understanding that minimum threshold for what residents expect. I think actually putting numbers to that is important, and every property is going to have a little bit different expectations. But I guess this is a topic for later. But I'm definitely in the camp of more L1 dedicated ports than fewer communal L2 ports, with of course whole bunch of caveats. The list of caveats is endless. And I put down my number, my ratio of dedicated L1 ports to communal L2 ports is about 4 to 1. I think you can justify 3 to 1, but would love to hear your thoughts, Shinzia, on sort of what number you and or Orange team considers to be a good trade-off in terms of dedicated to shared.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. The caveats are really endless when thinking about this, but I'm going to try to put on the lens of what we discussed when planning this presentation together, which was the development lens. And from a development perspective, you're going to have the ability to plan for load. And so there's, a lot of people get L1 confused with just like lower power charging. Um, so you can still put in lower power L2 devices that can be dedicated devices. So I just encourage whoever asked this question is to really determine like what they mean when they're saying L1, because L1 is a 120 volt product, and you can still get a lower power 240 volt product that is kind of this sweet spot in between where it can still be a dedicated product, but supply more power than a true L1 product. So I believe L1 products solve the needs for about 93-94% of commuters. The low power L2 products solve the needs for 99% of commuters. And then there's your shared, higher power products that you would have that, as long as you have access to it, solve the needs for 100% of folks. So yeah, just it depends on what we're actually talking about here. But if you're going with a new construction project, unless you're very budget constrained and you don't have a code requirement, you probably aren't installing L1 anyway. L1 is usually for a retrofit project,
Yeah,
but
that's
the low power L2 may be what the person was referencing here.
That's yeah, that's a perfect point. I wrote down a question for us to talk about a little bit later, but I think you mentioned just a little bit about the wiring sizes, and I want to stay there for a second because it's useful to recognize that the L1 ports are just going to have the three wires, the hot, the neutral, and the ground. And the 240-volt are typically going to have four wires. Um, so there is an additional cost for that fourth wire. But because the amperage might end up being the same, whereas the voltage um, is higher, you're able to use lower gauge wires, which are typically considerably lower cost. And that is a really big factor when you're running conduit and wires long distances, and is particularly valuable to get when you don't need a full power L2 setup. Even if you're using load management, if your charger can dispense a certain amount of power, it still has to have the wiring that can dispense that amount of power. So finding these balances, and I strongly believe that 20 amp 240-volt sort of circuit is a really good approach most of the time. I'd say the exceptions are typically less efficient vehicles or high mileage drivers, um, or locations where you have got multiple EVs relying on an individual dedicated circuit, and say they're swapping out their cars. They've got an assigned parking space and they've got unassigned parking space, and they're rotating their vehicles regularly to make sure that their cars are charged, every day. So just want to talk a little bit more about that. There's, a whole world of going down that realm, and obviously cost estimates are the end game, really. Like that's what we're trying to get to, so people can compare apples to apples and say, oh, if we went this way, it's going to cost this much. If we went this way, it's going to cost that much. And there's a lot of optimization to do. And
Yeah.
like you said, talking with your charging vendor is critical to understanding the products they have and um, how to optimize those costs.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you both. We're gonna move on to the next pre-submitted question. What are alternative sources of funding now that it appears that federal incentives are ending?
Well, I can take a first stab. And Chinzi, you can finish it up. So one, the federal incentives aren't ended yet. That bill has not passed, but it does seem very likely that we will lose many of those incentives, although crossing our fingers for a bunch of them. Um, Again, typically the bigger incentives have often been the utility incentives for L2s, state incentives. Occasionally, you'll see other incentives from cities, counties, air districts. Those are fairly lower chance. And there may be other programs. I've heard efforts from sort of like financing angles. Um, I I do think, and I actually would love your thoughts, Shinji, on this. I do think we're going to start seeing more companies providing long-term financing at the charging as a service model moving forward. And I am both excited and cautiously optimistic about that approach. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Chinzi, on that.
Yeah, I think everything you said was spot on there. We're not at this moment seeing incentives ending, but like you said, it's feels like it's coming. So in preparation for that, yeah, to your point, with there's going to be charging as a service that comes up. There's going to be capital partners that are out there that are looking to fund the entire capex, and then they'll own and manage the chargers on your property. So you'll want to, as incentives go away, no matter what, whether it was now or a little bit further down the road, incentives were going to go away. So it's understanding what your position is going to be on charging. Do you have the capability of making ancillary revenue off of these devices? And the hack that, I talked about, and ways to shorten that payback period are going to matter, right? You're going to want to leverage those parts of the equation to lower the payback period, to see, is that something that you can take on and plan for and have these sort of energy assets on your property? Or is the juice not worth the squeeze for you, and you hand over the ownership to capital partners that are looking to own more of these energy assets across the country?
I think I guess next slide, because I think we're getting off of the topic of incentives, but I wanna circle back with what you just said and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of charging as a service, and um, sort of moving into this new sphere of, if there aren't incentives that get you to where you want, how do you long-term plan for some of this infrastructure while trying to take advantage of the opportunity that some of these capital partners provide? Um, how do you see, I guess, what recommendations would you make for multifamily partners that are looking at charging as a service because either they just don't have the capital to invest right now, or they don't want that risk, but they also know that long term they want the infrastructure at that ground, in the ground, at the property. And I guess behind that is the backdrop of the different types of partners that are holding buildings long term, holding buildings less than 10 years. How do you look at that? How do you go through that?
Yeah, even as you ask the questions, I mean, the caveats in this are endless. So, and we talk about this all the time. So, whatever individual questions come up throughout this conversation, please, folks on the call, ping me afterwards, because we can talk about this all day long. But I would say, like, if I was uh, an owner and thinking about EV charging, and budgets are tight, right? I didn't plan to bring EV charging in. These charging as a service partners or capital partners that will fund and own the chargers on your property are a great solution to bring charging onto your property now. Like, what you don't want to do is wait too long, and this depends on the adoption in your market, which we have a lot of information on that as well. But depending on the adoption and the demand, and the funny thing about EV charging is it's sort of one of those, like, if you build it, they will come type of thing. So you may not have a ton of demand now, but then the moment that you do install, all of a sudden you have a lot of tenants coming in with EVs. So, but anywho, what I would say is, I wouldn't, like, if you've heard any demand, there's assets coming around your property that are going up with charging at scale. So they've had, new properties coming up that have code requirements. I would be urgent to bring charging to my property in any capacity, whether I have the budget or not. I would look to find solutions to just bring charging to my property, but not put the decision on the back burner of what to do in the long run. So by bringing in charging as a service or capital partners, you're giving them ownership and sort of exclusivity to charging on your property for what could be up to, like, 10, 12 years. And so realizing that the more properties that you give up in that way, you won't be able to really, take back. So you'll want to continue behind the scenes making the decision, like, is it the right decision for you long term to own these assets, or just let somebody else own and operate them? And again, as Whit said, it will depend on how long you hang on to your properties for.
All right. I think we should turn to the
Yeah.
questions in the chat. Does that sound about right?
For sure. No, yeah, great points, Whit, and thank you for jumping into that, and Chinzia as well, both of you. We have one question that's come in so far, but I do want to flag. Wendy, one of our partners in Energetics in this project, mentions Orange Charger talking about juice being worth the squeeze and how that's pretty funny. So anyway, just had to pop that in there. We have a question from Ingrid at Plug in America. Are there any metrics about L2 versus L1 costs? Could you install 5 L1 outlets for the same cost as L2 or something around those lines?
It depends. I mean, as to all good questions, it depends, especially when it comes to EV charging at multifamily properties. Chinzy, I guess, do you have comments on specific costs on that?
Yeah, it's as you said, depends. Again, I'm just gonna hold up the wire, and maybe like with my white sleeve in the background, you can just see the size. Okay, here we go. Of the wire differences here. So this is an L2 40 amp circuit. This is a L1 or L2 20 amp circuit. So just off the bat, you can see they're about half the size of each other. So from an infrastructure perspective, just the wiring alone, not even talking about the device prices, you can already save half your infrastructure costs on getting the wire out to that charger. So, if you want to say 50% in infrastructure costs, that's an easy thing to throw. And then, the labor that it takes to install these types of devices are very different. So you can factor that in. So we have, business models, and even Fourth, I believe you guys have some business models on the cost that it would take to install L1 versus L2, but it all depends on,
Yeah,
what levels we're talking about.
for sure. So Whit had mentioned, or the project builder tool that Charge at Home has. So currently it will generate cost estimates based on level 2 charging at your properties, based on unique inputs you can put in. We're working on having an L1 option toggle.
Okay.
So that might be a good way for folks. Again, they're estimations based on the data we have, which is growing every week. We're trying to find more data on level 2 and level 1 installation data for multifamily. So that might be a good way to kind of play around with those costs. Like, what would a L2, if I want to electrify 10 spaces, what would it look like with an L2 versus an L1 option? So yeah, just want to kind of throw that in.
It's a wide range, but we usually say you can get 2 to 4 times the amount of chargers with the smaller circuit sizes than the larger.
Awesome. We have a question that just came in from Gil. How long would it take an EV to recharge with 20 amps level 2 versus level 1 20 amps or level 2 40 amps? Or does it matter more the voltage, assuming a small fleet or one vehicle?
So I can answer this fairly quickly, but it's not going to depend. It's going to depend on your state of charge, the amount of kilowatt hours you're wanting to get. But level 1, it also depends on the voltage drop, which is primarily due to the distance that the circuit is run and the temperature. But those 20 amps reference the circuit breaker amount. So you're looking at 80% of that amperage amount times the voltage. For level 1, that's 120 approximately, or for level 2, that's either 208 volts or 240 volts, typically 240 in the US at this point. And then, so that's just math. Depends on how many kilowatt hours you're trying to get. L1 is about 1.9 kilowatts. Low level 2 is about what 2 point what is it? Oh gosh, it's like 3.8 or something like that. A little bit higher than that at times. And then full is going to be 7.2-ish. That sound about right? I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's not critical. When in doubt, find like a little calculator, a charging calculator, and there's some great apps out there and some good websites for for identifying those specific.
Yeah, we have, if anyone would like, we kind of have a driver model for each of the device types. So happy to share that out as well.
We've got another, and Gil says thanks. So a question coming in from Eleanor says, how common slash difficult is it to direct wire the dedicated, okay, sorry. How common difficult is it to direct wire the dedicated charger to each tenant's individual meter so they can pay the energy costs on their electric bill? I will say our next webinar is talking about a case study where this happened here in Portland, Oregon, but I'll let Chinzia kind of talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. Let me pull this question up. I can't really talk to the difficulty of adding a charger to the residence meter, but I will say that if you are going to add chargers to residence meter, you can simply get an industrial outlet. You don't need to go with a sort of fancy charging system like Orange, no, or any other system. You can just source, and I really want to stress, an industrial outlet, because there are serious risks to your property if you source anything under that. So because, you know, our typical dryer outlets were not really meant for continuous charge and plugging in and unplugging, so you need to be very careful. But if you're going to put anything on a residence meter and they're paying for their own consumption, nobody needs to be reimbursed, you can source an industrial outlet.
I want to jump in here as well. And I really appreciate that statement on the industrial outlet. I've had a lot of conversations over the years, and that cannot be stressed enough. Non-industrial outlets were not made to be plugged in and out repeatedly like that. Also, good reminder to, when these are installed, just like if you're the electrician that's installing it, like obviously triple checking the tightness of the wiring connections. It's a lot of power, and we've got the electrical codes in place for good reasons. I want to step back though. This is literally a question that we are answering in the condo, the new and existing condo toolkits that we're developing right now. And this is a really important question, particularly for condos where they typically have secure parking, obviously not all situations, and they typically have deeded parking spaces. So the value add to having a dedicated charger that is connected to your utility bill is even more valuable and can justify an even higher upfront cost, whether it's the unit owner paying for that or the developer building that into their pro forma, or however you want to call it, building it into their pricing mechanism and costs expectations and stuff. There are a couple different routes, and I'll talk about them really quickly because we don't have a lot of time. One is to literally put the circuit breaker into the unit panel, in the unit's electrical panel up where the unit is. That is typically impossible, or infeasible due to the cost and distances, but theoretically can happen, and particularly is useful to know about for townhomes or small properties. Next one up that that I have met quite a few people and talked to a lot of people about is connecting into the wire that goes from the unit resident meter to the resident panel. That's a pretty thick wire. You can splice in another circuit, and monitor the amount of power that goes up to the unit's panel to make sure that there is always enough power to then send off some of that power to a separate circuit that has a separate circuit breaker, that then runs to the parking space that you want to provide dedicated parking with, dedicated charging with. That is, there's at least 3 products that I know of that can do that. And I'm really excited to see that field grow. You can even do that on a retrofit. It does not require any panel upgrades. It really just requires electrical room space, and that the distance to the parking space is not too far. I expect to see this. This is, I would say, the gold standard for any condo retrofit, so long as you have secure parking. There's not really a better method other than somehow making it slightly cheaper. And that's where I would go, find a lower power L2 so that you can lower the cost of the install. And then the third one is more research and development, but it's a virtual submeter that connects from the sub-metered outlet or sub-metered charger that's on an HOA panel, that then sends that energy to the correct residence bill, correct residence meter, while subtracting that load, that energy, from the HOA meter. Anyway, that is been proven that to be a option. It's just not a commercially viable product yet. Hoping to change that over the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah, I hope that was not too in depth, but that is certainly a topic that is of the utmost importance over the next few years.
Thank you, Whit. Not too in-depth. Perfect. We have one more question that came in, but before we get to that question, because we are getting kind of close to the end of time, I just wanted to mention, well, first of all, thank you, Chinzia, for your time and your presentation. Awesome. Always great working with you in Orange. We have an upcoming roundtable session in July, which is that direct unit to wire case study. The contractor who worked on that is going to be our presenter, along with the electrician they worked with locally here in Portland. Super excited. So join us. You can register at our website at chargeathome.org/events. Additionally, we have a newsletter. It's just on our homepage, which is chargeathome.org, where you'll learn about upcoming roundtables. Also, when we have new case studies drop. Right now, we have 2 that are on our website that are new. We have 10 that are archived from pre-2024, but we have like 5 to 8 in the pipeline that'll be being published in the next couple of weeks. So please stay tuned and check out the website. Okay, question from Gil again, again. If I have aluminum wiring, would you need it replaced with copper wiring, or can pigtailing work? And apologizes if that's not the right term.
I answered it. It's typically going to be fine. Yeah, period. They don't recommend it because aluminum goes through different expansion and contraction cycles, I guess, through when it heats up and cools down. That's based on what electricians have told me in the past. And obviously no aluminum for the actual cable. Chinzi, would you add anything else to that?
That's out of my wheelhouse, but it doesn't sound like something we would want to do, but perhaps in a condo setting may be okay.
If it's the circuit and it's just running to if it's just running to a receptacle, theoretically you could make it work. Again, that I don't know the full properties of aluminum that make it less optimal for circuitry for EV charging, but my guess is it just doesn't hold up quite as well. And you have to increase the gauge size, which makes it typically more expensive than otherwise. But again, it depends on the pricing of aluminum and copper. And that's one thing I would go straight to your electrician about. Typically, the National Electrical Code forbids aluminum in EV charging circuits, if I remember correctly, but I haven't checked out the NEC in a little while. Yeah, apologies. We've still got another couple minutes. Anna, do you have any other questions?
No other questions have come in, but I'm down to stay on for a few extra minutes.
I've got a few more questions as well, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, no, there's I want to go back to something around the exclusive amenity value of dedicated chargers versus communal, because there's a lot of people that are installing communal charging solutions and expecting them to work long term. And Shinzia, how do you deal with those conversations? How do you have those conversations when property owners and managers ask you about it?
About like the long-term benefits of shared charging, communal charging?
Yeah, like how to deal with communal charging approaches as demand increases, especially if they don't have the panel capacity to really fully build out that charging strategy.
Yeah, well, I know that we offer a lot of kind of policy recommendations and marketing recommendations for properties. But if I was, and Whit, correct me wherever I'm going off trail as to what your question was, but I think I understood your question is just ultimately like, you know, what are your options if you don't have a lot of panel capacity? And also what we see for what we believe is going to happen in the properties that are just installing, like leaning towards shared chargers, is that you can down the road, if you have more drivers, then you'll have shared chargers. Consider splitting the circuits that you do have and deciding, you know, what you break that down to, how far you can break down those circuits, of what you do have. So maybe you have, you know, 5 or 6 40-amp circuits today. Tomorrow those can be split and doubled. That's how I would consider if I didn't have panel capacity at my property. But overall, like if you're deciding, if you do have the capacity, you know, you're going to want to put in whatever device is going to get the most utilization so that you can pay back your hardware, and your install.
Makes sense. Any final thoughts? Close out thoughts?
No, I think we're good, but I just, again, Chinzia, thank you so much. Whit, thank you so much for hopping in. And yeah, thank you to everyone who spent this time with us this morning. And we hope that we'll see you on July 24th. And if you have any questions, you want to get involved in this project, or you have great install data for level 2 or low power options, please let us know, because we would love to talk with you more about integrating that into our project builder tool. So again, thank you all. I see, awesome. Peggy, I see your comment. We'll flag that. If you want to talk more about your comment, please reach out to us. We're happy to schedule a call. So thanks again. Thank you, Chinzia, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great day. Bye all.